So it's time for our next speaker, and it's Trine Falbe from Denmark, joining us from Denmark. Hi, Trine. Welcome to WUDMilan.
There we go. Thank you very much. Yes, yeah. Unmuting the microphone, classic mistake. To forget that.
It's okay. So Trine is currently head of innovation at Smart Academy in Denmark, and she has worked with UX for 20 years, dedicated to ethical design. She has written 2 books, and she will run a new masterclass with Smashing Magazine in March 2022. So in her talk today, Trine will share her thoughts on what it takes to make product and services more responsible. And you'll learn ways to identify opportunities for improvement, how to get business buy-in, and how to set up for success. So I can't wait to hear it. Trine, welcome.
Thank you very much. So let me share my screen really quickly and get the slides up and running. Hang on. There we go. So hopefully you can see a slide that says responsible product design and nothing else than that, which is the topic of this talk. So generally, I never hear anyone say that responsible design or ethical design is a bad thing. So the great thing about that notion is that we all seem to be motivated to become better at being responsible in the way that we design. So regardless of whether that motivation is genuinely shipping better products, wanting to make the world a better place, or whether it's to advance our career, or whether it's to make competitive advantages to our company or the product that we own, isn't really that important to me. The most important thing is that it seems that there's a lot of motivation on this field. However, the questions that I often hear from fellow UX designers, product managers, product owners, UI designers are some different types of questions. One is, how do I convince my boss or team or organization that this is a good idea? Why should we change anything in our process? Because we're already making good money, and who cares if we have some dark patterns, and if our data collection is kind of sketchy, we're making money, right? How do I convince my organization that this is not the right way to go? The second question I often hear is, how can I personally drive change? What responsibility can I as an individual take to create change, to drive change? And the final question is often, so, okay, I want to do this, but how do I do it? How do I get started? And that's going to be, these 3 questions will kind of be the focus of the next 30 minutes that I'll be sharing that with you, and hopefully give you some ideas as to how to answer these questions. The first thing that I want to do, though, is just to have a very sort of clear definition of what is ethical design. So in the ethical design handbook that I wrote together with my 2 writing partners, we define ethical design as businesses, products, and services that grow from a principle of fairness and fundamental respect towards everyone involved. So basically, what we hope to do is to teach people to build ethical standards into their daily practice, because it shouldn't be seen as something that we kind of put on top, like the cherry on top of a cake. It doesn't really work that way. It has to be, built in and integrated into the process. I think you probably know the need for ethics in design, but I think it's also important just to frame the importance and frame the severity that we're actually facing as an industry. We all know that we have certain issues with certain social platforms that do certain things to their users that makes everything sort of very scary in a sense. This image that you're seeing on the screen now is kind of went around the world. It was from back when Facebook hit a certain number of followers or users. And we have happy Mark Zuckerberg in the middle here. And what it turns out is that he has, the social media, the social network that lives off of everyone sharing everything they have, actually has a little bit of tape over his own webcam, which is interesting. So that was, that kind of went around the world as a funny meme, but it's serious. We also see that the data brokering industry is booming. Oracle, which this is just an example of the number of unique customer IDs that certain data brokers have to their availability. And Oracle as one actually has access to 5 billion unique customer IDs, meaning that they can basically isolate whoever they feel like in the entire population of the world. 5 billion is very close to the amount of people that are in the world. So this is scary stuff. And we are seeing case after case where people's privacy and safety is being compromised. In China, they are considering how to rate and track citizens so that they can give banks and homeowners and real estate companies access to this type of data to assess citizens based on their ratings. And if we're seeing this in a bigger picture, we're facing a super scary future when people might be profiled based on their medical records and therefore their ability to buy insurances and things like that. So we're seeing into something that's quite scary. And it doesn't just happen in China. It happens in the US as well. One of the biggest insurance companies in the US required their customers to wear a Fitbit tracking device, basically, for them to be able to sign any type of insurances with their company. We also have stories like the one from Bounty Pregnancy Club that was fined 400,000 what do you call them? British pounds, because what they actually did was they sold 34 million data records to 39 different organizations. And this data was on new families, families with newborns, also on the newborns, all the way down to gender and date of birth and things like that. So comprehensive set of data that they sold to 39 different organizations without the knowledge of their users. So there's a lot of things going on. Onavo Protect was an app with the core purpose of protecting your online privacy. It was a VPN app. And what they did was at some point, they actually sold their data about their 24 million users to Facebook, which is just mind-blowing that could ever happen when you're a VPN app. But I guess if the money is big enough, you sell anything, right? But so you can see that there are a lot of different problems on the data protection layer, but it doesn't have to be just beyond that kind of layer. We also see tons of different designs, UIs, that are designed to trigger our loss aversion or sense of missing out, and all these different behavioral factors that we know exist and that can be used for good or for bad. And we see it used for bad quite a bit. This example here is a ticket buying place that's called Viagogo. They basically resell tickets. And what they do is they make sure that you are triggered in any way possible to buy now and buy as much as possible, because otherwise you're missing out. But actually interfaces with this mass of behavioral triggers can trigger anxiety. It can also trigger epilepsy. It can trigger reactions in people with multiple sclerosis. So this is beyond bad design. This is very, very unethical from a design standpoint. And even just things like forcing people to give up their name and email and phone number to get a hold of a demo of a piece of software. Why would you want to do that? All these decisions are business decisions, right? They're not made by the designer who created this interface. They're created by the business owners, the business holders, and the teams that are trained and asked to run the business. And we also have, something like this particular example. This is another example of a bad decision that's manifested in the product, in the digital product. When you want to buy, protein powder from Huel, once you enter their web shop, by miracle, a couple of different products are added to your shopping cart, even if you don't, you didn't click it yourself. It's just pre-selected in your shopping cart. So there are so many different decisions on different layers that take place that all contribute to bad design, to irresponsible, unethical design. So it doesn't really make sense to just talk about responsible product design, because the thing is that products are affected by the business, by the people who run the teams, by the customers, and by the processes in which we design the different products. And to make matters even more complicated, the product also affects all this back. And these different teams and these different layers affect each other in between, right? So we can't just talk about design as something meant for the product. We have to talk about the design of the entire ecosystem, where the product is the manifestation. So in order to really become clever at this, we need to look under the hood. We need to figure out, okay, what's going on under the surface, on the things that we can't see with our eyes. And that's actually something that we spent, I don't know, a year and a half researching for the Ethical Design Handbook. And I believe that we succeeded in really figuring out what is it that makes sense to work with if you want to improve on your ethical design scale or barometer. So diving more into this ethical design, it's interesting to look at what actually drives the change. Why is it that we need to start responding to the different factors that impact the way that we design and the whole market mechanism around us? So one thing is megatrends. Megatrends can be seen as currents that are impossible to stop, that kind of just flow around you. And one of the megatrends that we're seeing is sustainability. Another megatrend is responsibility. There is an increase in demand for responsibility, for companies to take responsibility. This is something that we see in different types of consumer polls and things like that. But we also see an acceleration in the digital transformation. We've had to, through Corona, define new ways of working, new ways of shopping, new ways of living. And just to give you a few numbers on this, in the US, online sales has grown times 10 compared to predictions, not just times 10 compared to last year, but times 10 compared to what they predicted would be happening in 2020. This is massive. McKinsey, one of the biggest agencies around to monitor these types of things, and noticed that in a survey that 50% of people who have tried new ways of shopping through Corona, and 65% of them will continue to do so. So we're seeing a huge spike in digitalization in the way that we shop, and most people on this call here, I mean, we were used to before Corona as well, probably to buy stuff online and to do our business online. But there's a huge portion of society that wasn't, and they're now jumping on this wagon. So it's just kind of exploding around us. There are three factors in particular that are interesting when we talk about the digital transformation as well. We're seeing a spike in transparency and also a demand for transparency, because this is something that the internet has sort of taught people over the years, right? It's very easy these days compared to 10 years ago to compare prices, to find information about products. You no longer have to go into a shop to get information on a certain product. You can just Google your way to that, right? And the downside from a business perspective on that is that this transparency flows through to the customers. So app reviews is a great example, right? I believe this review here was actually on for the Zoom app just after Corona hit. It says it's seriously bad. You're charged for calls and it keeps crashing. Also, did I mention that this is used to crush a lot of teenagers' dreams of just a tiny bit of free time? This was clearly a teenager who thought that, okay, being sent home from school and being homeschooled now meant that he or she could do, certain things throughout the day. And now Zoom came along, so now they're just stuck at home in school. So this sparked a negative app review. And these app reviews can't be erased by the company. They live out there, right? So consumers can look up these things online, and we are looking to each other as consumers for advice much more, and we trust that advice much more than we trust the advice of the companies because we know that they're biased. We also see a huge demand in transparency for pricing, for instance. So all this nonsense where we are, where one price is kind of surfaced, and then it turns out when we are ready to buy that the price has increased with 50%. That's not something that consumers are happy with. And this is what often triggers high bounce rates. So a survey from Baymart showed that 24% of users have abandoned an order within the past 3 months because they couldn't see or calculate the total order cost. 24% is pretty bad, right? That's 1 in 4 customers that actually bounce on a sale because they couldn't see or calculate the total order cost before they got to the final step of the shopping experience. So there is a huge requirement, and it's become the norm that we want this type of transparency. And this kind of happens all the time with the way that things improve around us. Just look at how what web design looked like in the mid 90s, right? Once a new feature came along, that feature was seen as something new initially, but then 6 months later, when most websites had adopted, for instance, type along in search, that became the norm. That became the expectation, the lowest bar, right? So this happens all the time. So we as companies have to follow along on this. And I'm seeing lots of currents that indicate that moving towards ethical design and improving on the ethics of our design is very much something that we need to do to follow along in the sort of in the trends of time, consumer trends. But transparency also goes beyond pricing. You can't run an ethical business if you're with transparent pricing, but what then surfaces is that your products are being made in somewhere in Asia, and you're taking advantage of children, or you are violating people's privacy digitally because you're harvesting a lot of data. So these things kind of don't match up. And one company that I want to maybe just use as a really good example is Lynx Cars. Lynx Cars is typically used as a really bad example on design, UI design. And I mean, we can't blame anyone who would claim that there is an issue with the design, right? I'm really trying to be very pragmatic here and diplomatic. But the thing about Lynx Cars is that they work actively with transparency in many ways, not just in their pricing. So even if they're challenged in design, they've managed to build a very, very strong brand because they have an extreme customer focus. And here is a portion of the privacy policy, which, by the way, is the only privacy policy I believe I've ever read where I laughed. So I definitely encourage you to find the privacy policy for Lynx Cars and just read it from beginning to end. It's a lot of fun and also very valuable. So it states here that Lynx says that I would love to sell the data because I would make a fortune out of it, but I don't. I put it on a compost heap called old data, and I sit on it, and eventually worms eat it. So this is just another way of saying that, yes, I know I could sell all the data and make a fortune, but I don't, because I respect my customers' privacy. And she even manages to communicate it in a way that customers can relate to and can smile at and also can understand. So this is a really good example of this extreme transparency. The second thing that also is something that we're seeing an increase in demand for is traceability. And also because we can trace everything around us. Back in the day, if you bought something at a store, you only had the paper receipt to rely on, right? For if the stuff broke or if something went wrong with it. And sometimes it was really their word against ours, right? We couldn't prove that the boots had broke just by, tragic accident. And the store didn't believe us. So digital systems help this type of traceability, and is something that helps both customers and companies. And we shouldn't see that as a bad thing, that this traceability goes both ways, because then we can treat each other with respect and with fairness. So companies can't dismiss a poor review online because it's out there, because it's traceable, right? But customers, on the other hand, if they have a digital receipt that says something specific, they can't really run away from that fact, right? And here's another example that I actually find very interesting. I haven't seen this type of system before. It's also from Lynx Cars. They created a system called Lingo, obviously, to document customer communication. So they basically transcribe all the interactions they have with customers to be able to trace back what happened at a certain point in a certain case. And this is something that is welcomed both by the company, by Lynx Cars, or the car dealers that they sort of they stand in between, and the customers. So this is a very interesting take on extreme traceability. The third and final factor that I want to touch on is simplicity, because we're seeing an increase in demand for this. And one place where this is very, very evident is in e-commerce. Another BayMart study shows that 23% of cases where an online purchase is abandoned is because of an overly complicated checkout process. So there's no doubt that this digital transformation is on the rise. And there is an expectation and a pressure from the consumers for us to, become more responsible in our product design. But it's very interesting, this fact that that simplicity is such a powerful factor, right? Because a lot of UIs that we see tend to become more and more plastered with stuff and features and things like that, because we mistakenly think that this is helpful for the, for the sales. But actually, the opposite direction is better. Going simple is usually a much better idea if you want to improve your conversion rates. So that's maybe something to put as a mental note. Rather take stuff away than add features. So let's go to how we as individuals can initiate this type of change. It sounds simple and obvious, but what we need to become better at is making better decisions. And I know that not everyone is in a position to ask these questions, but I still encourage questions to be asked. Sometimes, even if we're not at a position from an organizational point of view to ask these types of questions, doesn't mean we shouldn't. Because sometimes someone further up will think, well, that was an interesting question. I'm not sure that I want to answer it, but that's also kind of an answer, right? There are 4 questions that I usually challenge people to ask whenever they face a decision, right? Whenever we make a product decision, whenever we make a team decision, whenever we make a business decision, we ask ourselves, why are we making this decision? I think intent is something that we tend to overlook. What is the intention behind the decision that we're making? Is it just to make more money? Is it to improve something over time? Is it to create more value for our customers? And ideally, we should be able to have the intention of both improving our own business, but also adding value to the service or product that we deliver to our customers. That combination is by far the strongest. The second question is, who benefits from the decision? And all these questions are kind of connected, right? But who benefits? Is it just the business, or is it the consumers? Is it society? Is it the environment? Who benefits from the decision that we're making? The third question is, what are the consequences of the decision? And this is a very, very important question, because if we can't answer, if we're not willing to follow the trail of thought, okay, what if we do this certain thing to our product? What are the long-term and short-term consequences, not just for us as a business, but also for the people who are exposed to this type of decision, right? So for business decisions, there's typically a short-term gain, right? But is it also a long-term win? If we, for instance, decide to automatically sign people up to our newsletter, that could be a decision, right? The short-term gain from that is we increase our newsletter signups by, I don't know, X%, right? But the long-term gain, is that just as good, or is it actually a backlash towards our brand? And how much does that brand and that positioning suffer compared to the short-term win that we gained from forcing people to sign up to our newsletter? The fourth question that I typically ask people to ask themselves and their team is one that triggers more of an emotional response, because the other questions are typically geared towards, the decision itself. But this fourth question is, would I want my loved ones to be using this product or to be on the other side of this decision? The reason why it's so important to ask this question is that we tend, as professionals, to remove ourselves from what we do. And that's fine, that's okay. But in order to use ourselves to take responsibility for empowering others and ourselves to create better products, we have to also show some empathy. We have to activate our own empathy. And if the trigger response to this question is heck no, then you might want to follow up with why. Why is it that we don't want someone that we love to be using this product with this decision implemented, or whatever the decision is? That's important. And ultimately, if all this stuff is too sort of detailed, takes too long, ask yourself the question of, am I proud of the work that I just did? You know the answer to that question when you look at the work you just did. Am I proud? Is it like, so proud of the feature that I've built that allows for people to sign up with just a single step, reducing friction and ensuring their digital safety? Is that kind of, yay, this is what I just built, right? We know that. On the other hand, we can't say that we're proud of having built a feature that secretly adds products to the user's shopping cart. Yay, we would never want to flag that, right? We wouldn't want to brag about that. We would just kind of hide that in a drawer and then get on with our work and separate ourselves from that forced decision. So that's a really good asset test. And I can tell you one of my proudest moments in work. I fortunately have a lot of proud moments, but one really proud moment connected to ethical design was the decision that I helped enforce in a startup that I worked in. I convinced the C-level to stop collecting gender data. We were making a platform for children, and when I joined the team, they, as one data point, collected whether the users were boys or girls. And I challenged that decision, asking, why do we actually need that? Do we need that data? What's the consequence of collecting this? Should we consider removing it? And we did. And that was a super proud moment for me, because this is something that vastly improved our sort of ethical design on our ethical design scale. And I'm sure you have moments like these that you can recall, and you also have moments that you don't want to recall, and those are the ones that we should challenge. So to make better decisions, as I said, we have to have a certain sort of level in the organization, right? But we can also help enable better decisions, because we have to enable it to make them, right? And one thing that I don't know if there are any sort of management people in this talk, or at least people who have some type of decision-making responsibility in a team context. I challenge you to go home and make a governance model. If you don't have, I'm actually curious to know how many people on this in this talk, how many of you actually work from a known governance model? Do you know if you have one? Do you have one? What does it contain, right? I mean, governance models are these mystified things that kind of flow around, and a lot of people actually don't know if they have them and what they actually contain, but it's a super valuable tool. A governance model is a set of rules that specifies how a team should work together. Pretty simple. But what's important with it is that it gives mandate. It gives the responsibility to someone to make certain decisions. And we have to give that we have to give that mandate and that responsibility to others for this really to take off. So an ethical governance model, ethical design governance model could contain, ethical standards, objectives, how new features are designed to meet these objectives, right? But we have to first set the objectives. What is it that we actually want from this product? And most importantly, how do we give responsibility and freedom to employees, to the team, give them mandate to actually stop certain things from reaching the end product if it doesn't conform with the ethical standards. We have to give people mandate to stop certain things in the process. If we don't do that, then this is just a useless piece of paper to throw at someone at a meeting. We also need to define how tests are performed and what are their success criteria. Because if we can't say, okay, this feature conforms to the ethical standards because it tested like this is the success criteria for this particular feature. If we don't have that definition, then we are kind of just fumbling in the dark. But this is where ethical design really takes its shape, or takes its beginning, because it gives mandate and it defines a frame that we all work together to uphold. So where do you start? Do you start with asking your manager, or if you're a manager yourself, to do a governance model? Maybe. But it depends on your role and it depends on your responsibility. And the one thing that I will say is that it takes time. It takes time to make these changes. So you have to have lots of patience. But the first thing you can do is identify the challenges that you have. And for that purpose, in the Ethical Design Handbook, we actually created the Ethical Design Scorecard. So a scorecard is a general model that can be used to pulse check the state of things, and in this case, ethical design. So a scorecard consists of a set of statements and an evaluation score and a weight for each of these statements. And then you assess and evaluate based on each of these how well or how poor a statement scores, and that gives you ultimately a pretty good idea as to where you perform well and where you fall short. And this is a really good place to start. And in the book, we have 8 different scorecards, and these are actually downloadable from the book's website as well in an Excel spreadsheet that you can just grab and use as your own tool. This is really powerful because it also, again, separates things a little bit and makes you aware of where the biggest impact would be if you set out to improve ethical design on a certain area instead of trying to kind of fix the whole thing in one go, because you can't do that. It also provides a good baseline for KPIs, because again, we have to talk about this as business related things. It's not, we can't talk about ethical design as something subjective. We have to talk about ethical design as something more objective, and talk into the business layer, because that's where the big impact really happens. So you can create a set of baseline metrics to help you track your improvements over time based on these scorecard reviews. And the thing is that we know that improving on design works as a business case. McKinsey Design Index is a huge amount of research that was done over 5 years with 300 companies through tech, consumer goods, and retail banking. And it turned out to be this benchmark tool called the McKinsey Design Index. And what they realized is that the businesses with the biggest success have 4 things in common. They work user-centered throughout the organization. The design plays a central role in strategic planning. They all have robust design metrics to measure customer satisfaction. And the design department is not a silo. So that's, I think this is a very strong business case for ethical design as well, to notice that the best companies in the world, the companies that succeed the best, are the ones where design is actually an intricate part of thinking. So this is your business case, part of it. You also have to understand that you won't become a millionaire overnight. Ethical design is not for exponential growth. Just the notion of exponential growth and ethics is also kind of, it doesn't go very well hand in hand. But we also have to talk about the cost of making money, because we never talk about the cost of making money, but we should. What's the cost of treating your customers like this? Saying that I don't like discounts just because I don't want to receive your 700 newsletters a week from Wish, right? What's the cost of that? What's the cost of all the additional support calls? What's the cost of all the return goods? What's the cost of dark patterns? What's the cost of negative social media mentions? We tend to separate that from our design process, and that's just wrong. And actually, I mean, I have a lot of Baymart studies here because I think it's very interesting. But this is also another study that showed that 49% of people in a study created by behavioralscientists.org were likely to distrust websites that use manipulative design tricks. And 34% had a downright negative emotional reaction and used words like disgust and contempt when in relation to these brands. And if there's one thing that we need to continue treating with the utmost respect, is brand loyalty. It's one of the most coveted things that we can obtain as a business, and it's only becoming stronger. Trust and loyalty goes hand in hand. So we have to act in a way that makes us deserve the trust of our customers. And the best business case really you can do is proving that you get better results, but within the same budget and deadline. And you can do that if you use the tools that you know, but use them on ethical design. We have all the tools. We know what a KPI is. We know what a benchmark is. We know how to risk analyze. We know how to improve on UIs. So know that responsible design is not more work. It's just different work. So it's not a new tool set that you have to learn. You have to learn to use your tool set differently. And when you see that things move slow, it feels like running uphill, just remember you're treading new trails. Remember that you're treading new trails, and that change starts with a movement. So if we move together, we can make a change. And when you look back at when you started, and then 12 months, if you look back at that, you'll see that even though it felt like small incremental changes, you've actually made quite an advancement over time. So don't be discouraged. Just, have some patience and start. That's the most important thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Trine. What an amazing speech. Really so inspiring. And I think it perfectly tied together with the other speech we had today. For example, from Bradley, he talked about designing with mental health in mind.
Yes.
And my question maybe is, we tend to use a lot of metrics for defining success of a product. For example, like how many active user we have, or how many time they spend. And maybe we should find a new metric, a new kind of metric that values how much value are we providing to the actual user.
Yeah.
Any thoughts there?
I totally agree. I totally agree that the metrics very often used in business are very much related to the bottom line, to the numbers, right? To the money. Whereas maybe we should start challenging ourselves and ask, okay, instead of saying how many people can we convert, it's like which is really a religious term, right? How did that sneak into business? But how can we work hard to make our customers continuously choose us, right? It's also very much a wording thing. And I rarely meet businesses that actually measure on number of support calls and type of support calls. What type of support calls do we get in? What is it that people are angry about? I think support, the front desk personnel in general, could really help the business tremendously if business would just include them in the way that they plan and strategize. Because a lot of questions and a lot of anger that goes towards the support staff, is actually something that we could solve and systematize, and thereby also save our customers a lot of frustration. And so, for instance, if support continuously gets calls about shipping costs, what are the shipping costs or whatever, why not automate that and look into how we can actually surface some of the information that people are requesting, save them some frustration, save us tons of support calls or support emails. That's also, that's also a KPI. If we can reduce the cost of support, we can increase, spend that money on improving our design. But we tend to just look at other factors in business.
Thank you so much. We have many questions for you. For example, have you ever had to deny or resign a job because you were committed to ethical design?
I've said no to jobs, yes. But I fully acknowledge, well, I've said no because I didn't feel that the fit was the right one. I've also chosen not to apply for certain jobs because it wasn't the right fit. And I fully acknowledge that a lot of people need to take that job. I fully acknowledge that, and I'm also sorry that it has to be like that. But I fully acknowledge that that's the reality of a lot of people. What I would also say is that one thing is that we talk a lot about taking responsibility as products of people of digital products, right? We have to take the responsibility. I don't think we should take the blame. So there's a difference, right? Trying to take responsibility and then feeling that we should be the ones to blame or feeling guilt. It's two different things, and we have to separate that. Separate yourselves from the guilt. If the company you represent makes bad decisions, if you can, and if you can't align with those decisions and those values, try to find a company that will align with your values. But if you can't, if you financially if you're tied, separate yourself from the guilt because it's not your company. I think that's really important for our mental health as well. We talk a lot about people who work with Facebook and Google and the track record that they bring. And I'm not sure that I find that fair to them. Sorry, that was a long answer. It's just, yeah.
No, it was perfect. Trine, how would you comment the transparency of blockchain networks for businesses and ethics?
I don't work with blockchain. That's one answer that I could give. I feel that there are still too many unknowns. There are still too many environmental impact, and all these things. I think that there are certain industries, certain branches in our industry, certain companies in our industry that are not ready for ethical design, that are not, the reason why they're not is that they're built on something that fundamentally is separate from ethical design, if that makes sense. A lot of people ask me, well, what would you do to improve the ethical design of Facebook? And my very short answer is I wouldn't even try, because their business model, and it's not just to come with a cocky response, but the business model, the way that the structure is built on something that's fundamentally disconnected to thinking about the greater good of anyone except the business itself. And I think that's problematic. But ethical design is not for everyone, and that's fine. That's okay. That's it's not fine. But it's something that we just have to deal with.
Thank you. And I think maybe it ties in with the next questions. And it is attention and engagement from visitors has been shrinking with every generation. So how can companies design ethical UX for visitor in a time where there are a lot of good and bad competitors looking for user attention, time, and money? Mm-hmm. Is simplicity and minimalism the best solution?
It could be. As a rule of thumb, simplicity makes the decision process more focused for people, as a very general rule of thumb. I think I think a lot of so oftentimes when you see these really aggressive notifications, really aggressive ways of trying to lure people into buying more, etc., etc., really to me is a sign of laziness, because what these companies have failed to do is look at, okay, what value do we actually bring? So that's a challenge, right? And that's a challenge that I would give myself. If I had a product and I wanted to scale it, I would say, okay, how can I do that by adding more value? Because that's where the real connection with the customer is, right? You need to figure out how can you build the best in the world for them, and add that value to them so that they would want to, so that you're worthy of their time, attention, and money. But I think, again, it's a matter of how we look at stuff, how we look at things, how we look at the people who buy our products, the people who use our services. Are they just kind of this blurry, vague group of users out there that we just push as much product as we can to? Or is it actually a collaborator that we can also gain a lot of knowledge from? If we're not adding enough value, ask them, what value are you looking for? What value do you get with others that you don't get with us? And try to improve on those types of things. Become more curious on the value that you bring.
Thank you so much. We have one last question, and is how will this pandemic situation change the engagement of users through online products?
It's hard to say. I don't have a crystal ball. But I just actually this morning just read, we have a very skillful trend scientist in Denmark that as she said, well, and it wasn't really a prediction. Looking back at a previous crises, regardless of what that crisis is, world crisis, right? What happens is that even though certain behaviors stop before the crisis, we typically just pick up where we left. So there was this good analogy that said that even if the train stopped here at Corona Station, it also just leaves from Corona Station, just continues in the kind of the same direction, which is both uplifting and also kind of not very uplifting. For instance, all the carbon that we now continue to push out in the atmosphere and stuff like that. I wish that we would learn from the whole thing. But I think that again, I think the transformation, I mean, the fact that so many more people now spend more time on digital platforms is something that has just increased the amount of potential customers, potential people to use products, right? It's opened up to a different market, because the segment that is now online wasn't necessarily a lot online before Corona. I think we as designers have to be extra mindful now of the impact that we have, because people are spending more time online, and if we give them more of good stuff, that's great. If we give them more of the bad stuff, that's not so good.
Thank you so much. Let me thank you again for your amazing speech, and it was really so inspiring. I want to remind everyone that you're running a masterclass with Smashing Magazine. I don't know if you want to add a few words on that.
Yes, I am very, very excited that the Smashing Magazine thought it was an equally good idea as I did to try to really increase the knowledge on how to work with ethical design. So we're running a workshop in March, 5 times 2 hours evening time in Europe. And yeah, so you can go to smashingconf.com and find the tickets there. I'm sure we can also maybe organize a link out somewhere from you guys if you could share. All right, thank you so much for having me on and for the great questions.
It was truly a pleasure. So thank you so much and goodbye. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too. Bye.
So this speech concludes the first half of the day. I think we earned our nice lunch break. Just a quick reminder, check out our social channel, and please let us know how you're liking this edition of WUDMilan. Please use our hashtag WUDMilan, so we can see what you think. And with that, I think we can go to lunch and see you back at 3 p.m. for the rest of our amazing conference. Thank you so much.